working. Good morning, everybody. I am happy to open this session on the troubling topic of documenting war crimes. I'm not going to say much. I have one thing to say. I was asked to tell you that there is a non-digital mailing list of the Wiener Library. If you want to kind of get information, use it and whatever from the library, you can sign here, use this pen, branded by Tel Aviv University, so it's cool. Please, yeah, it's official. So use the mailing list. Anyway, we are returning to our first speaker, Sir Ron Huber, who is a faculty member of the Department of the Jewish History in Tel Aviv University and the head of the Goldstein Goren Diaspora Research Center at the university and the head of the university's diploma program in archival information science. He's also a member of the academic committee of Yad Vashem. His research focuses on various aspects of Holocaust memory and the formation of Holocaust consciousness in Israel and worldwide. In particular, he examines the interrelations between ideology and politics and collective memory and historiography. He published many books. He's a prolific author. The last book that was published by Yad Vashem and Zalman Shazar Center focuses on diplomacy between Israel and West Germany in the 50s and the 60s. So, I'm not sure. Is it working? Now it's working. So, the title of the book is Diplomacy in the Shape of Memory. Germany, 1953-1965. The floor is yours. And please do use the mic because they need it for the YouTube and transmission or whatever.
So thank you very much, Alex, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session and the conference. So in April 1959, Israel's Attorney General, and you can see here, Cohen, received an official letter from an official letter from a newly federal German body for the investigation of Nazi crimes located in Ludwigsburg, about 12 kilometers north of Stuttgart. The letter was delivered through Felix Shinar, the head of Israel's purchasing mission in Köln. This purchasing mission, after the reparation, or in the wake of the reparations agreement, in order to buy Israel, according to the Shinar and his delegations fulfilled the also of a consulate and an embassy in the absence of diplomatic relations between West Germany until 1965. Thus, the delegation served as a point of contact in this matter. A German public prosecutor signed the letter. His name was Erwin Schule, and you can see him here. He was the director of a new federal body for the investigation of Nazi crimes, known by the abbreviation Die Zentrale Stelle, ZSL, the Central Office, which was established only 5 months before. In the letter to Israel, Schule made a specific request to find Holocaust survivors, witnessed deportations to death camps and murder in Poland in 1942-1943. However, the message was much broader. Schule that working relations with Israeli police and the Ministry of Justice were essential for the locating of documents and particularly eyewitnesses. Based on he would be to build the case against Germans who took part in the mass shooting on the Eastern Front and in executing the destruction in death camps. Unbelievable as it may sound, at this time, no one in Israeli legal authorities was in charge of collecting criminal evidence of Nazis and their collaborators. Thus, the calling for help in this letter and others from Ludwigsburg caused much embarrassment on the Israeli side. Generally speaking, the bilateral relation between Israel and West Germany were based on considerations of realpolitik, and here you see the leaders, those who initiated this politic, Ben-Gurion and Adenauer in the famous the Waldorf Astoria in New York, March 1960. So they were based on considerations of realpolitik, and the issue of punishing Nazi criminals living peacefully in West Germany played only marginal place, if all. The request from West Germany and the embarrassment that it caused served as an impetus for the decision to establish a special police unit in Israel's police to investigate Nazi crimes. The goal was to help the German prosecutors and detectives, notably the Zentrale Stelle staff. A few months after its establishment, this unit began to send transcripts of testimonies to Germany. In Hebrew, it became known by its initial Chapan, Chakirot Pish'ei Nazim, the unit for the investigating of Nazi crimes. It functioned until 1992, and after that, its enormous archive was transferred to Yad Vashem. Simultaneously, and even before creating the relationship with the Israeli Ministry of Justice and the Israeli police, the Ludwigsburg Central Office forged with Yad Vashem and with Jewish organizations and institutes in several countries, as well with organizations of ex-inmates of concentration camps. So in this paper aims to shed some light on the foundations of the Zentrale Stelle Ludwigsburg and its archive, particularly the modus operandi of cooperation with Israeli Jewish activists and organizations. I will focus mainly on the first working relations that were established and evolved by the end of the 60s. The establishment of the Zentrale Stelle Ludwigsburg resulted from a joint decision made by the ministers of justice in West Germany federal states. Several trials of Nazi war criminals that were conducted in Germany in 1958, notably the trial, were the trigger for this decision. Documents and testimonies showcased in these trials revealed or refreshed memories about atrocities, mass murdered, executed by Germans who had succeeded in evading indictment. The revelations during 1958 trials, the Germans who committed severe crimes are living peacefully and even succeeded in developing prestigious careers and even acquiring command positions in police stations all over West Germany, intensified criticism in Germany and abroad, focusing on the disregard of German prosecutors for Nazi crimes. Against this background, the ministers of justice of the federal state realized that a special federal bureau was required to investigate the crimes that were committed in the German-occupied territories, particularly in the east. Over the time, the Zentrale Stelle became the most important tool for the investigation of Nazi crimes. The results of the preliminary investigations of the Zentrale Stelle were handed over to regional prosecutors of the German federal states to complete the investigation, try to establish the suspects' whereabouts and building against them. While the cooperation between the German prosecutors, Israeli Ministry of Justice, and the police began in 1959, ties with Yad Vashem had started 3 years before. Schüller, who was the leading prosecutor of the Ulm, initiated with the historian Yosef Kermish, the first head of Yad Vashem archive. The case of the Tilsit killing squad that was revealed during the Ulm trial served as a model for numerous cases in the 1960s, known as crime complex, Tat complex, in which a cluster of offenses of several perpetrators was connected to one particular criminal enterprise, such as death camp or a mobile killing squad. The 1964-1965 Treblinka trial and the 1963-1965 Auschwitz trial are only two well-known examples of the numerous crime complex trials in the 60s. Simultaneously to the links with Yad Vashem, Schüller approached other Jewish memorial and research institutes and activists such as IVO, the Wiener Library, Simon Wiesenthal, the head of the Vienna Documentation Center, and notably the Institute of Jewish Affairs of the World Jewish Congress, particularly the jurist Nehemiah Robinson, as well as organizations of ex-inmates of concentration camps. Urged by the need to help the German prosecutors, during the 60s, all these bodies, groups and individuals in Israel and abroad worked together, providing documents and particularly locating eyewitnesses worldwide. They created a network, which is the topic of my study now, that played an essential role in the investigations of legal proceedings against Nazi criminals who lived peacefully in West Germany. The documents, testimonies, and depositions they sent to the Zentrale Stelle served as one of the foundations of what has become, over the years, one of the most important archives for the studies on the Holocaust and other Nazi crimes. All documents and testimonies connected with hundreds of trials that took place over the years in Germany. It should be noted that as a result of the Cold War politics, it was almost impossible for the West German detectives to locate documents, let alone to interview potential eyewitnesses in the Eastern Bloc. Thus, the connection with Israel and Jewish organization was crucial. Moreover, Schüller and his colleagues had to work fast since they operated under the looming expiration of the statute of limitations scheduled for May 1960 for various offenses, notably manslaughter, and mainly expiration of scheduled for May 1965 for murder. In one of the first reports issued in 1959 about the first cooperation between Yad Vashem and the Zentrale Stelle, Kermish wrote that Yad Vashem assisted the Germans investigators with valuable information about Treblinka. They provided the names of Germans who were part of the death camp staff, ranks and positions of 20 war criminals, and 10 addresses of witnesses and survivors in Treblinka. They also send information on Lithuania and Latvia and evidences of crimes of perpetrators there. At the beginning of the 60s, requests from the Zentrale Stelle and exchanging of information and materials between Yad Vashem and the Zentrale Stelle became an almost daily routine. At the same time, Yad Vashem became an address for public prosecutors from various towns in West Germany, most of whom opened investigations after they received the initial findings from the Zentrale Stelle. The most effective help seems to come from the small Israeli police unit. A few months after its establishment, this unit began to send transcripts of testimonies to Germany. Remnants of Holocaust gave depositions in the Israeli courts, and these were transferred to Germany. Yad Vashem and the police unit did not only wait for a specific request from the German prosecutors, they also acted on their initiatives. They initiated investigations, and upon the evidence that they sent, German detectives located and arrested Nazi perpetrators. In the United States, the main point of contact for the German prosecutors was the Institute of Jewish Affairs. By the end of 1959 and the beginning of 1960, Robinson met with Schüle in Ludwigsburg and with Fritz Bauer, the Attorney General of Hessen, in Frankfurt, to discuss ways of cooperation. Bauer and his staff were particularly interested in testimonies and evidence concerning Auschwitz, while Schüle was concerned with Nazi crimes all over Europe, and particularly in the East. Our task, wrote Nehemiah Robinson in April 1961, consists in finding witnesses and obtaining their depositions, to collect evidence against particular criminals who are involved in investigations conducted by German prosecuting authorities or who may discover. In the case of Treblinka, for example, upon the request of the Zentrale Stelle and the investigating judge in Düsseldorf, the Institute of Jewish Affairs found over 25 witnesses and submitted a large volume of evidence, including detailed account on the mass murder. To locate witnesses in the United States and worldwide, the Institute of Jewish Affairs worked with the World Jewish Congress affiliates and other organizations such as the Canadian Jewish Congress and DAIA in Argentina. Michael Bryant, the historian who researched the trials of the 3 death camps of Aktion Reinhard, wrote, and I quote, "The fate of the defendant depended on the availability of eyewitnesses' testimony to connect him with the crimes recognized under the German Penal Code." The Auschwitz trial of 1963-1965 is considered as the most important trial against Nazi perpetrators ever taken place in West Germany. Raya Kagan, an employee of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, gave one of the most important testimonies in the trial. The acquaintance of the German prosecutors with Kagan in 1959, at the initial stage of the investigation, demonstrates the cooperation between officials and organizations in Israel and abroad who wanted to help the German prosecutors. Kagan was one of the first witnesses living in Israel, of whom Kermish of Yad Vashem reported to Hermann Langbein, the Secretary General of the International Committee of Ex-Inmates of Auschwitz. Langbein himself, an ex-inmate of Auschwitz, played an essential role in helping the Frankfurt prosecution team headed by Fritz Bauer to build the case against the Auschwitz perpetrators. Kagan worked as prisoner in the camp's political department and was able to testify against members of this department. So to conclude, the conduct of trials of Nazi criminals in Germany had been severely criticized already in the 60s. Over the years, criticism became even stronger. It is focused on the fact that large number of defendants received only light and frequently even ridiculous sentences. Many were acquitted and many others were released before the trial for real or probably more common fake illnesses. Despite the severe criticism of the conduct of the trials, and mainly on the light verdicts, scholars highly regarded the tremendous work of the Zentrale Stelle and the dedication of the prosecutors and the investigators in various parts of West Germany. Albert Rückel, the head of the Zentrale Stelle after Schule, stated that without the assistance of Israeli and Jewish organizations, it was impossible to prosecute so many of the criminals. For the German prosecutors and their associates and counterparts in Israel and the Jewish world, bringing Nazi criminals to trial was legal and moral duty, regardless of the frequently frustrating gap between the enormous crimes and the light verdicts. Even if many of the perpetrators received only light punishment, their participation in atrocities and murder became known in their community in Germany in large. The numerous trials, press reports about proceedings increased the knowledge and the awareness of the vast complex of crime initiated by the regime was supported by many German citizens, even if this awareness was not immediately felt. Yad Vashem staff stated, despite their disappointment with the verdicts, working together with the German prosecutors to expose perpetrators and to enhance the German global knowledge about the murder comprises an essential mission. Systematically collected archival documents, depositions, and interrogations gave a significant impetus to the study of the Nazi apparatus and its perpetrators and the implementation of the final solution. From the very beginning of their work, the policy of the Zentrale Stelle, and this is important for us to know, was that working with archivists and researchers, particularly historians, was essential for the investigating of a Nazi crime. They established particularly close relations with the historians of the Munich Institute für Zeitgeschichte, headed by the historian Helmut Krausnick. The historians participated as an expert witness in several cases against Nazi criminals, not in the 1963-1965 Auschwitz trial. As a result of this operation, from the very early, already in the 1960, the Zentrale Stelle adopted a very liberal policy regarding its archive and gave access to file of closed cases to the first scholars who wrote on National Socialism and the crimes and its crimes. Moreover, already in 1971, transferred copies of the numerous files to Yad Vashem, understanding the importance of the trials to the study of the Holocaust. Indeed, over the years, the pre-trial investigations and the proceedings of hundreds of thousands of documents became an essential source for the study of the implementation of the final solution and the executions of many more Nazi crimes. In 2000, it was decided that from now on, the Federal Archive, the Bundesarchiv, would be responsible for the historical archive. So they divided the place into two. For the historical archive, mainly for the research studies, meaning all the documents of the closed proceedings, while the central office would continue its original task in preliminary investigation of Nazi crimes based on the June 2015 decision of the German Ministers of Justice, and I quote, that the central office in Ludwigsburg will continue running in its present form further on as long as there are prosecution tasks to fulfill.
Thank you so much, Rodi. So we'll going to the discussion to the end, and I'm inviting our next speaker, Josephine Langer-Shahot of the Humboldt University of Berlin. She's a PhD candidate and a Minerva Fellow at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. In her dissertation project, she examines transnational networks of Holocaust researchers in Europe and Israel from 1945 to the early 60s. Prior to coming to Jerusalem, she was an Ernst Ludwig Ehrlich PhD Fellow and a research fellow at the German Schoenberg Institute in London. She holds an MA in Modern History and a BA in History and Area Studies from Humboldt University of Berlin. And she's going to speak about the Wiener libraries, early post-war years, and its transnational context from 1945 to 1961. The floor is yours. And back the mic, please.
Is it okay with the microphone? Yeah. Okay. Good morning, also from, yeah, that's okay? No? From, you need to change the batteries? Okay.
It's just annoying.
Huh?
It's annoying.
Yeah, it's, shall I start? Yeah, okay. Okay.
She's really changing the battery?
Okay. Okay. Shall I start without? No.
No, the chair has to say something, but I haven't prepared anything, so hope you're enjoying your time. Stop.
I think I will be a bit short here, I guess.
They told me there is plenty of time.
Sorry?
They told me there is plenty of time.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Great. Okay, we'll try. So, good morning, also from my side of things, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you about the Wiener Library in more detail, and thank you especially to Vera and her team for organizing the conference. And also thank you to Amir for showing us the collection this morning. I think I'm not alone in saying that it's always fascinating to see the actual archival material, so thank you. So the library we are all sitting or standing for my part in right now houses a collection that has been in Tel Aviv since 1980. But the history of the Wiener Library itself dates back many decades more. And as many of you know, and we heard this morning, an institution of the same name continues to exist in London. Here you can see pictures of the Wiener Library in London today and the building we're all in right now. The founding father of the library was the German Jew Alfred Wegener, who started collecting all kinds of books, journals, newspapers, and pamphlets on National Socialism, anti-Semitism, and fascism, and related subjects shortly after Hitler came to power in 1933. The library's early history thus dates back to a time of extreme crisis. Before coming to the main topic of my talk, the transnational context of this, sorry, this is a bit messy. The transnational context of this library in the early post-war years, and to one correspondence in particular, I shall briefly outline this aforementioned history. Alfred Wegener, born in 1885 in Potsdam, close to Berlin, was the founder of the library's predecessor organization, the Jewish Central Information Office, and its director until his death in 1964. He was, as his colleague Eva Reichmann put it in an article published a year after his death, the German Jew, and even if his attachment to Germany was shaken with National Socialism, it somehow remained intact even after the Shoah. It was, of course, a different kind of Germany that he was attached to than the one that the Nazis had created. Fighting for the other Germany and Europe, as he put it, were his lifelong work and passion. Alfred Wiener's life was closely linked to that of the Wiener Library and has been described in some detail by Ben Barkow, former director of the Wiener Library, and by current deputy director and head of the research department, Christine Schmidt. Wiener, a trained Orientalist, traveled to the Middle East and Palestine from 1909 to 1911 and then served in the First World War. Although he only received a minor medal as recognition for his service, he was proud of it, as Daniel Finkelstein, his grandson, described in his recently published family memoir, Hitler, Stalin, Mom and Dad. Shortly after the war, in 1919, these are pictures of Alfred Wiener and the article Eva Reichmann published after his death. Shortly after the war, in 1919, Wiener published Vor Pogromen, a study dealing with the risk of the rise of anti-Semitic pogroms at a time when many didn't acknowledge this threat yet. He also became an important figure in the Zentralverein Deutscher Bürger Jüdischen Glaubens, the single most important organization for German Jews at that time. There he got involved in the secret Büro Wilhelmstrasse, which was responsible for both the collection of Nazi material and anti-Nazi propaganda. It was here that the cornerstone was laid for the Jewish Central Information Office, which Wiener founded in Amsterdam in 1933-34, after having left Germany together with his family in 1933. At the JCIO, Wiener and a very small number of co-workers collected any information they could get hold of on National Socialism, fascism, and anti-Semitism in Germany and Europe. They collected newspapers, journals, books, pamphlets, and provided information for all those needed it. And as we saw in the library, the many small clippings from various newspapers. In 1938, Wiener decided to move his library to London because of the looming war. On a personal level, though, Finkelstein argues in his book, the family seemed to have believed that it was better for Wiener's life and children to stay in Amsterdam even after Wiener had moved to London. They were eventually taken to Westerbork in June 1943 and later deported to Bergen-Belsen. When the war broke out, the JCIO opened as Wiener's library in London, where it continued to provide information based on its collection to the Allied governments and to researchers. During the war years, Wiener spent time in New York, where he continued his collection efforts. It was here that he got reunited with his daughters. His wife had passed away shortly after the liberation from Bergen-Belsen. After the war, another time of crisis began for Wiener and his colleagues. Whereas the collection was needed by the Allies during the war and a certain amount of funding was guaranteed, in the aftermath of the war, there was uncertainty both regarding the funding and the scope of Wiener's library. Although Wiener managed to receive funding shortly after, the work of his library always remained precarious, and it is due to financial needs that part of the library was moved here to Tel Aviv later on. In London itself, Wiener and his staff were part of a very unique German Jewish community comprised mainly of Jewish refugees of German and Austrian descent. Two London organizations were especially close to the library. The Association for Jewish Refugees, founded in 1941, and later the Leo Baeck Institute, founded in 1955. With the latter, the Wiener Library shared premises for many years, and members of both institutions sat on the board of the respective other. Here you can see staff members and their partners. Hans Reichmann was board member of the LBI from the beginning, and his wife Eva joined the board after her husband's death in 1964. From the late 1940s onwards and during the 1950s, Wiener and his colleagues established an impressive wide range of contacts all over the world. Processed and catalogued only recently by the Wiener Holocaust Library in London, as it is named today, the impressive early years collection includes the letters Wiener and his staff members wrote and received from the late 1940s to 1961, the year Wiener passed away. In the collection, thousands of letters sent to and received from Europe, the Americas, and Israel can be found, and they prove just how well connected Wiener and his staff members were. Their counterparts were other scholars and intellectuals, politicians, and religious leaders, among the many famous figures of the 20th century. One of Wiener's main interests was the establishment of contacts with other scholars interested in the Jewish catastrophe, the Holocaust. Even before the term became common among experts and lay people alike, Wiener tried, as other early Holocaust researchers did, to put the many pieces of information together in order to understand what had happened, who was involved, and how the different victim groups reacted towards the attempt of complete destruction and extinction. Wiener therefore got in touch with those who, like him, collected evidence on the catastrophe. In the early years collection, the Wiener Holocaust Library archived letters sent to and received by individual scholars such as H.D. Adler, Leon Polyakov, and Josef Wolf, and many institutions such as YIVO in New York, Yad Vashem in Jerusalem, the Institute for War Documentation in Amsterdam, the Jewish Contemporary Documentation Center in Paris, the Jewish Historical Institute in Warsaw, and the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich. We just heard about it. Most of these correspondences, to give a general impression, revolved around questions about the exchange of material, such as books, publications of all sorts, and information regarding to numbers and persons having to do with National Socialism. Also, the correspondents exchanged their impressions about recent publications and asked for reviews and other contributions for their own respective journals, newspapers, or Festschriften. True relationships the Wiener Library established during the 1950s stand out not only because of their sheer volume and length, but also because of their content. The first one is with Yad Vashem, and the second with the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich. While the first one was mainly about the transfer of archival material from London to Jerusalem, the second one surrounded the development of a joint book project about the persecution of Jews under National Socialism. Because I don't have much time today, and because of its unique character, I will focus today on the letter exchange between Wiener and the Institute for Contemporary History. This exchange raises a number of questions that go beyond the scope of actual attempt to cooperate. For example, the one about Jewish-German encounters after the Holocaust. As I mentioned before, Alfred Wiener was a proud German Jew before the advent of Hitler to power, and even after the Holocaust and the war, he still believed in good Germans and a different Germany. He went as far as to say in a talk he gave in 1955 at a Jewish Christian event that even within the SS there were some decent people. I believe that it was in this spirit that he thought the cooperation with the Institute for Contemporary History to be crucial, even though its staff members were all German non-Jews and some of them had been NSDAP members. The correspondence between Wiener and the Institute's mostly male staff members begins with the for Wiener usual exchange of their respective publications, books, as gifts or loans, and all kinds of information. In addition, though, negotiations began about a joint book project commissioned by federal German institutions. Wiener and Helmut Krausnick, as at the time staff member but not yet director of the Institute, were to be personally responsible for the content. You can here see a meeting minute about the book project. The project, often referred to as Dokumentenwerk or Dokumentationswerk, was to deal with the persecution of the Jews, Judenverfolgung, under National Socialism. It was, one could argue, an early attempt to write the history of the Holocaust in Germany. Also, and I'm thankful to Ronnie Michel-Arieli for emphasizing this in her response to a talk I gave a few months ago, it can also be considered a first attempt of Holocaust education. The audience Wiener and Krausnick had in mind were young Germans, such as university students and teachers, and their goal was to educate them about the recent history in order to make them better citizens of Germany. It should be noted, though, that they agreed that the horrors of the persecution as such shouldn't be described in too much detail. Also, as they discussed in their letters, the book should be free from general judgments about the Germans. While there was general agreement about the book's content, one part was somewhat controversial. Wiener and Reichmann, who became part of the negotiations, were in favor of a chapter that dealt with the uniqueness of German Jews. But one of the Germans involved in the project objected the idea. Karl Thieme of the Federal Agency for Home Service, Bundeszentrale für Heimatdienst, wrote in response to a memorandum drafted by Wiener. After all, probation and failure between 1933 and 1945 are not about how monstrous things happen to particularly deserving fellow citizens, but about these events themselves, which are to be condemned in exactly the same way whether they happen to Jewish people or gypsies. Unquote. The maltreatment of human beings was the unbearable, not only the maltreatment of Jews, Thieme added. To Wiener and Reichmann, though, it was indeed important to point out the special nature of the persecution of those who had previously been an integral part of German society. This is what Reichmann later wrote in a note to Thieme's memorandum in which he commented on the further planning of the book project. I consider this part indispensable because A, the younger generation in Germany today is no longer aware of the most primitive facts of this kind. B, the full horror of the crimes only becomes clear against this background. Thieme's objection that a crime against nomadic gypsies is just as condemnable as a crime against Jews who have lived in Germany for 2,000 years is basically correct, but ignores the counter-objection that it was war after all and that the Jew was the enemy of the Germans. This view, which is probably still around today, must be countered with the fact that the Jews could not have been enemies because they were simply Germans. It becomes clear through such passages just how important the differentiation between themselves as Germans and other victim groups was to Wiener and Reichmann. They pointed to the specific nature of the persecution and extermination of German Jewry, which affected Wiener and Reichmann personally. From their perspective, the attack on German Jews was an attack of Germans against Germans, as Moshe Zimmermann put in his book of the same name. As Reichmann's reaction shows, the comparison of German Jews to Roma, some of which were of course also German, was perceived almost as an insult. In the end, interestingly, those involved in the book project gave in to Wiener's and Reichmann's position, and the chapter became an integral part of its planned structure. Two other German Jews were part of the project. Eleonore Sterling, who was commissioned by Krausnick for the collection of material on the part he was responsible for, and Francis Ludwig Carsten, who Wiener commissioned for his part. Both, Sterling and Carsten, took many years longer for their respective chapters than initially anticipated. This caused huge pressure on Wiener and Krausnick with regards to the donors, the federal German institutions. From 1960 onwards, Krausnick and Wiener thus grew concerned that funds would have to be cut or even paid back. In fact, however, the German officials involved had repeatedly granted delays. The dissatisfaction with Carsten's manuscript was ultimately so great, and Krausnick himself was too overworked to revise it, that another author was finally brought in to take over the revision in 1961, Hans Mommsen. His manuscript, which he also submitted after some delay, was, in Krausnick's damning judgment, far too academic and without any psychological feeling of how to present the subject. Mommsen, who Krausnick described as a difficult character, had probably gone a little overboard with his manuscript, and the work that Sterling and Carsten had done beforehand was ultimately barely recognizable. All this happened 7 years after work began on the project, which was initially scheduled to last only half a year. Bringing in a new author, as I understood the correspondence, was seen as the last chance to bring the manuscript to a desirable conclusion after all. The relationship with Mommsen grew difficult as well, when Krausnick and Wiener demanded changes in the manuscript. When he was no longer available for further work due to a new professional commitment in the beginning of 1963, it seemed clear that the project would not be brought to conclusion. In July 1963, then came the official message from a staff member of the Federal Agency for Home Service that no further services were to be provided. So, after almost a decade of difficult work and thousands of letters exchanged, the Dokumentenwerk project came to an unsuccessful end. In my opinion, this does not mean that it is merely a footnote in history, but sheds light on the priority given to a joint project on the persecution of Jews. First of all, the short time frame was initially estimated for the project is somewhat surprising. Only 6 months, as it is mentioned in earliest drafts, for the preparation of a manuscript on a topic that had previously been researched very little seems either naive or ignorant of the subject. It seems as if there was an understanding at the time that a small selection of documents, because these should, as the name suggests, be the focus, would suffice to present the persecution of Jews in adequate form. Furthermore, both sides, Wiener and Krausnik, gave remarkably little priority to the project. Again and again, weeks, if not months, passed before one party answered the other, and often reference was made to other, more urgent work. In addition, neither Krausnik nor Wiener assigned the preparation of the manuscript parts to in-house employees, but rather to external researchers who, as became apparent over time, had their own interests and tried to assert them. It seems that despite the initial willingness, or even joy, as they put it, of working together to publish a book on the persecution of Jews, neither Wiener nor Krausnik gave it top priority. One might guess that the complexity of the subject itself and the complexity of presenting it in a digestible way, as the editors hoped, only became apparent when working on the book. Since the field of Holocaust research had not been established at that time, it seems that the different parties involved on all sides underestimated the time and work effort such a project would bring about. Looking back, such a project might seem far too ambitious, especially with so many actors involved. Nonetheless, Wiener seemed to have been distressed by this unfortunate outcome. After the project came to an end, he wrote to the German official Bettina Groneweg, who had become involved in the project at later stages. In his report, he described to her the many things that had gone wrong and called the Dokumentenwerk his Sorgenkind, his constant problem child. Wiener passed away only 8 months later after sending the report. Let me now conclude this talk by a few general remarks. Alfred Wiener left behind thousands of letters that proved just how important the ongoing exchange with other scholars was to him. He was, of course, not alone. All those involved in early Holocaust research relied on their colleagues to provide them with information and publications otherwise not available in the respective countries they lived in. While this might be true for all academic endeavors, for early Holocaust collection and documentation efforts, it had a far greater urgency. Collecting evidence on the Jewish catastrophe, as we discussed yesterday, and I am sure we will later today as well, was closely linked not only to research, but also to honoring those murdered by the Nazis and to the prosecution of the perpetrators. It was also, as it was the case for the Dokumentenwerk, about educating a younger generation about what had happened. The transnational contacts Wiener established were thus both typical for early Holocaust researchers and unique in their outlook and perspective. In Wiener's case, they were of major importance for the development of his library's holdings and activities. For all researchers, they were crucial to the knowledge about the Jewish catastrophe. Many thanks.
Thank you so much, Josephine. Oh, now the mic is working. Our next speaker is Dr. Alexander Avram. He's the director of the Hall of Names and the central database of the Shoah victims' names at Yad Vashem, and currently the interim director of the Yad Vashem Archive. He earned his PhD at the Bar-Ilan University in Jewish history, and he specializes on onomastic research as well as on history of Jewish presence in the Romanian principalities, coexistence and anti-Semitism in the 19th century Romania and in the Holocaust in Romania and Transnistria. He's been working with Yad Vashem since the 80s, right? He was engaged in many projects. He represented Yad Vashem as an expert in various international contexts and commissions relating to the Holocaust, and he's an advisor to Holocaust memorials in Berlin, in Auschwitz-Birkenau, and in the Museum of the Holocaust of the Jews of Romania. The floor is yours, and Dr. Avram is going to speak about documenting and commemorating the names of the Shoah victims at Yad Vashem. And now,
thank you very much. Yad Vashem was mentioned in both talks before, and especially the Yad Vashem archives. You see here a picture of Yad Vashem, and I think that most of you know that Yad Vashem was established in 1953 on basis of a law of the Knesset. But what I can tell you is that Yad Vashem, the idea for Yad Vashem was started in the late 40s and in mid 40s, and in 45 there was the initiative for Yad Vashem started in November, and what you see here is the first, the protocol of the first meeting of the directorate of Yad Vashem, discussing the main missions of the new institutions. It's February 46. And you can see here the names of the participants to the meeting. And the first two missions, the first one is collection of documentation. That is documentation about the Holocaust, meaning an archive, and gathering of the names of the victims of the Holocaust. We are speaking here about documenting the crimes of the Nazis. If we are documenting also the victims, we are documenting the crimes. And there was talk about the ways to gather the names. The first one proposed was to call upon the families of those missing, of those who perished in the Holocaust or murdered in the Holocaust, to report the names. And the second was to, it is written here, to go to the archives of the extermination camps. This is rather difficult because in most in the extermination camps there was no registration, but if we are talking about camps, concentration camps and so on, it is valid. Okay. So I will not speak here about the Yad Vashem archives mostly, but about another, the second part. The holdings of Yad Vashem collections, you can see here in all 191 million pages of documentation. Some of them are original documents, some are copies of documents from many archives worldwide. We have a copy of the holdings of the Arolsen archives, which was ITS. Since 1957 we have a copy, and we have a recent copy scanned, which is more advanced. And besides the archives, we have almost 600,000 photographs in the archives in the Hall of Names. We have almost 140,000 survivors' testimonies, half of them on video, and also in our art museum there are artifacts and artworks. I will, oh, sorry. Just a minute, please. Okay, so I will speak now about the documentation of the names of Holocaust victims that started in Yad Vashem almost from the beginning, 53, 54. At the beginning, there was documentation by communities. And what you see here is a register from the community of Ivia in the Glubokie, Powiat, and Vilno district. Each line is, there is information about one victim of the Holocaust from this community. It was upon 2 pages with the biographical documentation that was known. And then a little bit later, in 54, it started the individual commemoration on what we call pages of testimony. This is a page of testimony in 1954. There was a pilot in South America, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, and we have a few thousand of pages of testimony from them. And then in 1955, there was a national campaign of collecting pages of testimony. What you see here is the classical page of testimonies of the 50s, with the last name, first name, place of birth, date of birth, and so on and so on. Children would have been registered if they were minor on the page of the mother or the father, and on the bottom there is information about the person who gave the data, mostly members of the family. Between 55 and 57, there was a national campaign of collecting pages of testimony. At the beginning, there were registration stations across the country, and people were called upon to come and fill out pages of testimony. By the end of 56, the methodology was changed, and there were teams of people people working for Yad Vashem that were going from door to door and asking to fill out pages of testimony. And what you see here is a badge, the symbol of Yad Vashem at the time, that was apposed on the door of a family who filled out pages of testimony in order for another team not to come and bother the family with the same difficult problem. This is a page of testimony in English, so everybody can read it. And this is a synopsis of the phases of collecting pages of testimony. As I said, between 55 and 57, there was this national campaign that resulted in more than 800,000 names on pages of testimony, including the names of the children. After this campaign, Yad Vashem continued to collect pages of testimony from Israel and from all over the world. At its offices on Ben Yehuda 12 in the center of Jerusalem, and the offices were moved on Har Herzl, Mount Herzl, Mount of Remembrance, next to Mount Herzl, in 1958-59. In the 1980s, the average of pages of testimony, new pages of testimony, was about 15,000 a year. Beginning with 1990, the yearly average jumped to 35,000 after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then we started to get pages of testimony from the former USSR, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and so on. In 85, there was a project of rearranging the pages of testimony alphabetically and filming on microfilm. So we had a backup copy in case of fire or something like this. It was very important to have a backup copy, and also it was easier to locate the pages on microfilm. In 1992, we started to computerize the information, the data from the pages of testimony. So by 98, we had almost 470,000 names on computer. And we started to work also with the published lists of deportation to extermination camps from Germany, from France, Holland, and so on. We started to do OCR, optical character recognition, in order to extract the names and put them on digital media. So we had about 1 million names computerized in 1999. We have been approached by the International Commission for the dormant Swiss accounts. I don't know if it rings a bell, but there were Jewish international organization claimed that a number of Jews, at least, put their monies in the Swiss banks before the war, or before the break of the war in 1939, but they didn't come back from the Holocaust, so the families couldn't have access to those accounts. The Swiss banks said there's nothing like this. In the end, it appeared that there were some Jewish names of beneficiaries, and there was an international commission. Paul Volcker, the federal, the federal chief of the Federal Reserve in the United States, was the president, and the banks had to produce, and they found a list, established a list with 300,000 beneficiaries of dormant accounts, and they requested a list of Holocaust victims in order to make them match. Okay, And it appeared that something that we knew all the time at Yad Vashem, but maybe the public wasn't aware of that. The number of 6 million is a mythical number. There was not, it appeared in the Nuremberg trials and so on, but there was never actually a list of Holocaust victims. The Nazis did not document the names of the victims. They had no incentive to do that. On the contrary, they tried to blur the traces of the crimes at the end of the war. So we had a special project about this, and we had worked for 5 months from February to June 1989 with more than 1,000 employees, mostly students and computer experts and so on. And we have digitized more than 1,100,000 pages of testimony that were waiting. And we gave to the Commission a database with 2,500,000 names. They did the matching, and the result was 54,000 names of Jewish beneficiaries of dormant accounts that were published on the internet. And then there was a judge in Zurich for more than 25 years that allotted these monies to the families. And this is one of the pictures of this endeavor. And in parallel, we had come to the conclusion that in the 1950s, at the time of the national campaign of collecting pages of testimony, many of the survivors and the members of the families of the victims could not bring themselves to fill out pages of testimony. Some because it was emotionally very difficult. The wounds were still open. It was very. Look, sometimes people fill out pages of testimony, not 1 or 2, 5, 10, sometimes 20, for an extended family. It is very difficult emotionally. We now send sometimes volunteers to assist these people and to help them fill out the pages of testimony. So in the 50s, it was very difficult. And on the other side, many families harbored still a hope that somebody would pop up. There was this relative search on the radio. We have Chava Alberstein, Ushara Aliyah, and so she talks about how at midday everybody was silent in order to hear the names of those who would come to Israel. So how can you fill a page of testimony for somebody that maybe is still alive? So we came to the conclusion that in the late 90s, things were very different, and people were much more prone to fill out pages of testimony. So we started this campaign on April 8, 99. As I said, the yearly average was 35,000. You see that in only 2 months we received almost 150,000 pages of testimony. It was overwhelming. We have established this call center, and we succeeded to collect almost 400,000 pages until the end of 2000. From our random samples, 84% of the names were new names. Sometimes they were repeating, okay, but so this is the call center. Now, this collection was acknowledged by the UNESCO and mentioned in the Memory of the World International Register as a treasure for humanity, in the sense that it's the first time in history that a genocide was documented on a nominal level of the victims. Okay. And this was in 2013, and it was very meaningful to us. Now, we have spoken about the pages of testimony, This collection has now more than 2,815,000 names. But since the early 2000, we have started to work not only with those names from the deportation list, but with names extracted from archival documentation, beginning with Yad Vashem archives and then from other different sources. And we have established a database that it includes names from the pages of testimony and also from many other sources. So you can see that in January this year, we had close to 2,800,000 names from the pages of the testimony and close to 3 million names records from many other hundreds and hundreds of different sources, including memorial endeavors and so on. In all, there were 5,770,000 names records of Jews that were murdered. And but because we know that sometimes the name of the person is appears in a few sources, and I explain immediately, we estimate that the number of individual victims is actually 4,900,000. Those were those for whom we have information that were murdered, and we have information about other Jews that were persecuted during the Holocaust. 455,000 Jews that were reported at the same certain date in a camp or a ghetto. We don't know what was the fate at the end of the war. 751,000 Jews registered under the occupation, mainly for forced labor, and the victims of the evacuation, for instance. At the time of the Barbarossa campaign, many Jews fought refuge over the Ural and Central Asia and the former USSR, and we have their names also, and we have also names of more than 700,000 survivors that mostly are on the internet. Now, when I speak about name records, it means that a name record is the number of fields that of information that we have about a specific person in one specific document. Sometimes we have multiple documents. We have and the name of a person can appear in different sources. So we are establishing something like we call a cluster, which links the different names records. As you see here, for instance, one page of testimony, 2 different lists, but it's the same person. In our database, if you are looking, for instance, somebody called Rudolf Stadler, you receive a number of 13 or 11 different records that could be one or more persons. After we did this clustering process, we know that there should be something like 5 persons. About one, we have a number of documents, and this Rudy, for instance, is from Czechoslovakia. We don't know if it's the same person as Rudolf. We don't have enough bits of data in order to be sure. If I go into that has many documents, we can see all the documents linked. Until now, we have succeeded to create 600,000 clusters, manually and computer-assisted. You can see here how it works with the computer. It takes all the relevant fields and compares the content with variants and so on. And if we have at least 5 matching items, we can be sure 99%. There's never perfection. That is the same person. If there is less 4, for instance, we have to do the check manually and maybe have a result. Our database is has been on the internet since 2004. You have here the number of the visits and breakdown by regions, and what is interesting, my IT colleagues tell me that the average of time spent on a page on the internet is 3.5 minutes. The time spent by our visitors is double. Okay, we are dealing with requests from the public to correct, to add photographs, documents, and so on, and there are a lot of requests, more than 20,000 a year. We are adding to this database between 50 to 100,000 new names, and we are trying to there are some 1 million names still missing, so we are trying to find them. We had a very large project on Hungary in between 2007 2017. Our staff went over 20 million pages of documentation in Hungarian archives. Why? Because the European archives don't have specific keywords for Jews. It's undemocratic. Okay. And for the Holocaust. They didn't, historically, it was not a keyword. So we have to go over large numbers of documentation. We have selected 2 million pages that we have scanned, and from this we have extracted 700,000 names, and we enlarged the number of the known victims from Hungary from 42% to 80%. We have looked for other sources. Religious sectors did not fill pages of testimony, but commemorated the names, for instance, in dedications in religious books, on memorial plaques in synagogues, on matzevot, on tombstones. You can see the name of the person who passed away after the war, and then names of the siblings or parents that were murdered during the Holocaust. And recently we have turned to new technologies. We are trying to apply AI technologies like named entity recognition on survivors' testimonies that are full of names of members of the family, names of people that they met during their journey through the Holocaust, and to extract names from this names that we are not aware of from this text. So there is a lot of work to be done. This is promising, but it will take time until we can be sure that the results are trustful and accurate. Thank you very much.
I think so, yeah. So now it's the time for a discussion, and I'm just going to pass the mic because you must speak to the mic, and I'm sending it over in this direction. That's all. Yeah.
Is it possible to turn that off? The
Thank you. My question goes mostly to Ronnie Stauber. I was interested in the framing of the research, that you began with the German application and then the collaboration, but it seems that this has already taken place after the war in Poland, beginning with the Jewish Historical Commission that was part of the forensic investigation, and Holocaust survivors there gave testimonies in the Polish trials. So that the whole model is going back there. And the reason I'm asking you is that Kermish was on one of these investigations, but also Rachel Auerbach was there. So the question for me is about continuity and how much is it going back to this model, and when we tell the story, is it uniquely, German beginning to look at it, or can we connect it to the earlier model that was already taken place there? Mostly, I wanted to hear about the contribution of Auerbach to this kind of, especially
So-
to Treblinka.
Yes, so first of all, I would say that the German prosecutors, for them everything was new. I mean,
Not for Yad Vashem.
not for Yad Vashem, but they approached Yad Vashem, they didn't know anything about the Jewish commissions in Poland, and this was everything was new for them. And also you should take into consideration that most of the people of the staff were really young Germans. There are many interesting testimonies on them coming to Luxembourg when they didn't know anything about the Holocaust, and they just began to realize what happened and what their parents or relatives did. It was really a shock for them. And they became very dedicated to the mission. So they didn't know anything, and they began to approach the Yad Vashem and other institutes who were involved in this. Yad Vashem and the Institute of Jewish Affairs and others. Something that they did before, and they knew the job. And the thing is, what I'm trying to show is how these institutes who were involved in these missions for years and knew the material, how they tried to help the Germans. This is something that Schuller, which I mentioned, he realized at a very early stage that he needed the experience, he needed their help, not only for Jews, but also for the Institute for Zeitgeschichte. He also asked to understand what really happened. So he asked for the help of Krausnig and others. At the same time, he asked for the help of I didn't find things about Rachel Auerbach specifically in this network, but she was part of Yad Vashem, and everything that she did, working with Kermish and others, of course, it has an impact. It has an impact, and of course, one of the main mission was to find eyewitnesses, and for that, of course, there was the help of Rachel Auerbach.
The question for me is how much the influence came the other way around. For example, you said about expert testimonies of historians. This has begun in Poland. How much does it come? Do you see it coming from the Jewish organizations who did, and the Jewish historian survivors who already did it in the early?
I think that when, for example, in the Ulm case in '58, when it actually began in '56, when Erwin Schuller just was the prosecutor, he didn't know anything about it, and it was his idea to have an expert, and then he approached the Institute for Zeitgeschichte, and which was only established in 1950. And there were only few German historians at that time who dealt with the issue of the National Socialism, and then he realized what the problem was, that he came to the conclusion that the people who testified in the Ulm trial, for example, were only the perpetrators. And he came to the conclusion that he won't be able, they are lying, they are giving, they are lying, and you can't really trust their testimonies because they were all the same, they were all perpetrators. So he realized that he needs, the victims. This is one thing. The second is that he won't be able, to really to show that someone was involved in a specific murder. This is according to the German Penal Code, without someone that will specifically point and say this is the one who made these atrocities. So for that he needed but I mean, the first idea to work with experts, I think, was his idea. But
Also,
working,
the Auschwitz trial,
no. Then he worked, but just, I mean, starting from 1965 or 1968, he began to work with the Jewish institutes, and then he realized how they work. I mean, that's what I'm trying to show in my study, that it's really became kind of a network. People work together. They correspondence with each other. He's asking for help. How can we help him? Let him give him this advice. Let's do that. I mean, you see all the correspondence coming between Vienna and New York and Paris and you name it. I mean, there is kind of really a worldwide network of Jews and inmates of ex-inmates of concentration camps who are really working together, trying to help the German prosecutors. And this is the story. I think this is a very interesting story because this is kind of a cooperation between German and Jews. I mean, bringing Nazis to trial when the zeitgeist all around was just a zeitgeist of interest and not dealing with the Nazi crimes.
Thank you. So the next question is there. Yes, you. And please do present yourself.
Hi, I'm Noam. I'm just a first-year PhD student at Cambridge. So I have two questions, if that's okay. So first for President Schauber. So you were talking about the transnational network, and I was wondering if it ever reached more of a grassroots level, as in people were submitting their own testimonies or their family's testimonies, or if it was more just on an official level. And then for Alexander Avram, I was wondering how much data do you need to add a new name? Is one mention of the name enough for them to become relevant, or do they need to show up in multiple places?
Now you do have a microphone, so just try speaking and they're going to hear it.
I'm not sure if I quite understand your question, but I'll try. So the thing was that both the Israeli police here in Israel and the Jewish organization, like the Institutes of Jewish Affairs, they received the requests from Germany about specific crime. And the prosecutors wrote to them, this is the case, we need testimonies. We need people that will be able to come. The best thing that was that they will be able to come to Germany and to testify, or that they will give testimony in front of judge, and then you will send us the testimonies to Germany. And then they looked all around, and this was the mission. They looked all around. In the United States, they send messengers to all over. And actually all over the world. This was the network. I mean, between the New York and the Buenos Aires and other cities looking for a specific witness that will be able to speak about the specific criminal. The thing is that according to the German law, I won't go now to all the details, but it was enough to say that the crimes was committed and that someone committed that crime in order to stop the limitations, the statute of limitation. This was very important. And then, because of that, it was very important for them just to go to the judge to say, well, there was a crime there. We know that there was this criminal. We don't know his name and his whereabouts. But if we'll have, the judge said, okay, if you'll have someone that can testify that about this crime, we can stop the statute of limitation, and it won't go on. So that's what was, and so they looked all around to find the specific people that will be able to give a specific testimony about a specific perpetrator. This is the story.
I'm sorry, but I did not understand exactly what the question was.
So, when you're like collecting names of victims, how frequently does a name have to come up for it to become relevant to you, or is like one mention of a name enough?
Okay. One mention is enough. We are not trying to actually we are not actively trying to have more iterations or more appearances of this of a specific name. We need one, but sometimes we are getting different sources, and the same person appears in the different sources. So we have to make a link in order to know that it's the same person. But because of this, there are people in our database that are mentioned twice, sometimes 9 times. There is somebody who's mentioned 30 times. Okay, but one time is enough in order to. This is the minimum that we want to know the name of the victim. Okay, and actually something like 80% of the victims in the database are only mentioned once. Okay. About the question with the commissions and so on, I think that I'm not an expert, but I think that what happened with the Główna Komisja in Poland, they didn't ask for witnesses from Israel. They had their own witnesses, I think, and
The other way around, the Jewish Commission.
I know, but what happened? What happened in Poland stayed in Poland. What happened here is in the sense that Poland was.
I'll explain the things. First, you're right, because the thing is, and I mentioned it, you should take into consideration the politics of the Cold War.
That's what I mean.
Because, yeah, I know that that's what you mentioned. That's what you meant. And there was a really difficult mission for the German prosecutors from West Germany to find people in the Eastern Bloc. And that's why they asked the Israelis to help them. But Liora spoke about the tradition, about I understand, about the committees who worked in the same way that the German prosecutors adopted, and she asked if they were influenced or they knew about it. So I think that eventually the work together was based on some kind of a tradition.
So now,
Actually, the testimony helped, for instance, in the indictment of Klaus Barbie. On the same premises that you need somebody specific.
That will come, yes, right.
So the children from Israel.
My question is also to Alexandra. I'd like to ask you about sharing the experience and cooperation of Yad Vashem with other places that experience genocide, and more specifically, because I know there was some kind of cooperation between Yad Vashem and Rwanda. Both government organization and non-government organization in its effort to commemorate and also to save to collect the names of the victim. So I would like to hear if this was an extraordinary case or it's common to assist to share the knowledge and experience with other cases.
Well, we have been approached by institution in Rwanda, and at the time from Yugoslavia, Sarajevo, and so on, and also from Cambodia, in order to see how they wanted to see how we are documenting the victims, and to have similar forms in order to collect the name of the victims among the people who were affected by this. But if you mean, we have also documentation. There were delegations that came and saw what we have done, and they took the idea of how to have similar forms and to circulate them and to collect names. We have also cooperation with a lot of institutions that are documenting and computerizing names of Nazi victims. In the Gedenkstätte, for instance, the former camps in Germany, there are projects in Bergen, Flossenburg, Dachau, and so on that are documenting the names of the inmates in the camps. So we have had exchanges of names for the Jewish inmates and so on. And with Auschwitz, Mauthausen, a lot of institutions like this, and we have cooperation with them. It's okay. It's working.
My name is Kunduz. I'm a PhD student here at Tel Aviv University and also in Yad Vashem I work. I had a question to Ronnie Stauber. It's very interesting you said about cooperation. And Zentralstelle is, for German case, is very interesting because there were processes already before 58 under the provision of the Alliierten, whereas in Austria it was legal processes on their own from 45 till 55, where Soviet Union didn't decide to intervene into the legal processes as in Germany happened. But my question was about after this Zentralstelle was established, to which extent the Austrian legal experts were interested to continue their processes. Like, have you also tried to make comparison of this Volksgerichtsakten with Zentralstelle?
Sorry, I did not. And this is a very interesting question. But what I can tell you is that Simon Wiesenthal was in a very strong, had a very strong connections with the prosecutors in West Germany, and at the same time he fought against the establishment in Austria in bringing Nazis to trials and to change all the atmosphere in Austria towards this issue. So you can see that I searched his archive, the Simon Wiesenthal archive in Vienna, and there is all kind of correspondence regarding what interests Simon Wiesenthal the most were the Austrian criminals. So he correspondence all the time with the German prosecutors, asking them what to do and how to do. So this is what I can tell you at this point.
Thank you. First of all, to the question, to the discussion that was here before, I think that maybe the basic thing is that in Israel, Germany, Poland, and other places, whenever there is an attempt to bring people to trial, the questions are very focused, as Rami said before, because of the legal system on what this person or that person did to whatever victim. So that what makes those testimonies many times alike. And this brings me to the first question, which is especially to Ronnie and Alex, and that is, those are collections which were not gathered in order to give historians or researchers documents to work on. And the question is, first of all, what historical information can be gathered, and what are the main lacunas? How do those collections shape or our research? And I know that I'm using all the time the Hall of Names, and I know that many other researchers are doing it. So maybe if Alex can say a few words about the usage of researchers in this important archive. The second question, which is to all three of you, Alex has showed us some of the challenges that we have that Yad Vashem has in making this collection accessible to so many people. And the question is that today, when we're in the age of knowledge, what are the main challenges in making those different collections accessible to researchers, and especially what are the parts of those collections which are not accessible and that one must get to that archive in order to see those documents? Thank you.
So, Javi, thank you for your question, because I think this is a very important question. And what really fascinated me, one of the things that fascinated me in the work of the Zentrale Stelle, and I just in the last couple of days I corresponded with them again about just to make sure that from the very, very beginning, and I said they adopted a very liberal approach towards giving access to historians. I think that many archives, maybe in Israel and abroad, should take this lesson for them, to understand that it is important. They understood how important it's that they won't keep the information just for themselves. And they let historians, and I checked it, I know who were these historians, mainly from the Institute für Zeitgeschichte in Munich, that's right. They gave them access to the closed trials. And this, I think, very important, and I tried to look who were the first, it was interested me, and I tried to look who were the first historians who used this archive and when. And I found out that, first of all, it was Helmut Krausnig, of course, who used it, and his book on the Einsatzgruppe. And also in one of the books that you probably know, one of the first books on the Wehrmacht, Keine Kameraden, for example, they used the Zentrale Stelle. So you can see that in a very earlier stage, historians began to use. Now, what I think, and then of course, later on, Christopher Browning and others. So let us take, for example, the example of Christopher Browning in Ordinary Men. I mean, this is really an important example of how it is important to use the proceedings of a legal issue, I mean, to understand or to try to understand the spirit of the perpetrators. Of course, you can't just rely, we are historians, we know that you can't just take this one testimony of a perpetrators that have their agenda and why they are saying it, and that's all. But you can, of course, as we do, we compare it to other sources. But you can see that and today, in more and more studies, for example, even Yitzhak Arad, in his studies on the Aktion Reinhard camps, he's using testimonies from the Aktion Reinhard trials. So I think that the proceedings are really very important. First of all, in try to understand the perpetrators, because they are saying things about, and for example, if we are taking the Christopher Browning, I mean, people, he's trying, to say how many ardent Nazis there were and how many those who weren't really ardent, and so he's trying to look at these testimonies and what the perpetrators said in that, and then to compare it, I mean, to previous trials, of course. And it's also very important for the victims, because to understand the victims, because take into consideration that these were first testimonies. I mean, if people gave testimonies already in Israel or in United States at the end of the 50s, the beginning of the 60s, it probably, for many of them, it was the first testimony that they gave. And at that time, people, what you mentioned before, there were people who were really able, and this is fascinating, who were really able to identify the perpetrator. Something that they didn't do before, because you know that the victims, of course we all know, didn't know the names of the perpetrators, didn't know the units that they belonged to, but then they saw them. In the trial they could, or even before, pictures were sent. The Zentrale Stelle sent pictures to United States, to Israel, to ask to identify the perpetrators. And they could identify, it was amazing. And this was the only way, to find out if this person was guilty or not.
It's needed. Well, look, I said that in the archives of the Yad Vashem there are almost 140,000 testimonies. Okay, in fact there are many more. This is the trials are a trove for testimonies that until now were not recognized as testimonies and separated and treated as such. So we have a we have a collection that is TR11 and so on, and we are only now trying to document each and every different testimony as such, and so there will be tens of thousands, I think, and there are many other collections that have testimonies or declarations and so on. So in fact there is, as I said, a trove of information there. The problem is the access, in the sense that if there something like 70% of the archives at Yad Vashem are cataloged at the level of the researcher. Okay, so there are things that you can see online, but mostly you have to go to our reading room, and you have now access to a lot of documents that 2 years ago were not available. The problem, we have the embarrassment of the riches, okay, the rich men, in the sense that in the last 10 years we have brought to Yad Vashem every year something between 2-3 million pages of documentation, that it's mind-blowing, but it's our capacity of cataloging these are limited. And as we get more information, we have more of a gap. So we are working on that, but I think that the only way in order to speed up this and open it more, not only to the reading room, but to the online, is only with artificial intelligence. Because we don't have enough stuff, and it's each institution has limited resources, and however we have a number of people who are doing this cataloging, but they are not able as human beings to do that at a speed that it's matching the number of the pages that we are bringing. For instance, we have a new agreement with one of the Vatican archives. Over 4 years we are to get 100 pages, but if we have to catalog this, it will take 5-7 years, okay? At manual cataloging. So we have a very big challenge with this. It's and we have to move on this direction. Lacune, I don't know. It's all those testimonies, for instance, give a lot of bits of information of larger range of events during the Holocaust. okay? But there is there only that what there is there, okay? We might be missing testimonies from another region, and we cannot give something that we don't have, okay? So it's up to the researcher to make sense of these things, and if you are talking about the names database, that is also a trove of information. For instance, you can do onomastical research on names and surnames that were used by Jews in different countries, different areas, and so on. You can have social economic researches. On the pages of testimony from 1950s, you have the number of children in the family. Okay, so I did a random search years ago, and I came to the conclusion that by what is registered there, average family had something like 3 or 4 children, not 12. And it includes people that were religious before the war. So you can learn things slightly different. We have documented professions. So you can do a social or economical profile of different communities by this, as much as this is representative, because not every time we have the profession of the person, but you can, I was surprised to see that in Poland there were Jews that were owners of oil wells. Not everybody would think of that, but in the Galician Carpathians and also in Moldovan Carpathians in Romania, the Jews were the first, among the first that started the oil industry. There were engineers, there were administrators, and also owners. And then you have Jews that worked in, I don't know, making gloves. And you have gloves with 5 fingers, with 4 fingers, with 3 fingers, with 1 finger, and it seems that there were different things. It's for different uses. So you can learn a lot of things, but we still have to do a lot of work in order to make this information available and to optimize it. We have to translate it because we had a lot of sources in Hungarian only, so we have to translate to Hebrew and English all these professions. It takes time, and people speaking Hungarian. So I also go back to the limited resources, unfortunately. But there is information there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So. Okay. So I wanted to say something about the collection. So I haven't talked about this in my presentation, but I think the most interesting collection the Wiener Library assembled in the 1950s were their eyewitness collection. Amir showed us a few of those documents, and I think it's really okay. So. Okay. So I think this is like the most important collection. I think I want to say a word about Auerbach as well in this context, but I think what is like how to make use of them today, I think is a good question, and also because I think at the time the way they conducted the interviews was very different from later on. So, for example, people would ask the interviewees would ask for the exact name of a city somebody was from. So there were lots of back and forth and corrections. So the question is, if we would how would we use them as authentic or whatever, or is it only about this question of meta? So how did the Wiener Library conduct interviews and all of this? Christine Schmidt, who works at the Wiener Library, is interested in those eyewitness accounts in particular. But yeah, it's difficult to say like what would we make out of them today. But I think what is interesting about these accounts, like in the case for Wiener, is really what they tell us about the networks and the like how well Wiener and his staff members were connected. And because the first people they interviewed were acquaintances, friends, and all of these people who they knew from Germany and then Austria and by extension. So this is also a question: what does that do to the interview if it's like a friend or someone you know who conducts the interview? So many questions here, and the question again, what to do with those? Can you actually take them for authentic evidence, for example, on the November program, or is it only the meta? And then about Auerbach, I had a conversation with Christine Schmidt about Auerbach because she comes up so much, and it's interesting because in the Wiener libraries, it was also a woman who was responsible for the eyewitness accounts. It was Eva Reichmann, and for sure there must have been some connection, but it's really hard to get hold of a document that says so and that really shows this influence. So Christine Schmidt told me that on the back of one letter exchanged between the Wiener Library and Yad Vashem, but not Auerbach, but Balkadori, there is like a note: give this to Auerbach. I haven't seen the letter myself yet. I need to double check that. But so it's interesting. Like we're trying to, so this influence and this tradition, where is it? And it must be there somewhere also in the eyewitness account project of Wiener Library. But where is it? Where can we find her? And it's difficult. And I think it's difficult with ideas and influences in general to really, put the finger on it. But I think it's really interesting to see this connection. I think in the case for Wiener, language does play a role. So Auerbach didn't speak or write in German, I think. Yeah, we talked about this yesterday. So this is like, maybe somebody else took over the correspondence, and this is why they never exchanged directly, Eva Reichmann and Rachel Auerbach. Maybe it was to other reasons.
It's really interesting to see how women remain in the memory or not. For example, we heard about the collecting of testimonies. It was all Auerbach in Yad Vashem who began it, and we didn't hear about her. So the way
only her. We have to remember.
No, but she was the head of the unit to collect.
She was the first one.
It's important when you tell the history of an institution and to give credit for the woman who was responsible for it.
I agree, but you can find her quite widely in Moscow and World and others. I mean, she was a very important person, but somehow I feel that focusing on her can do the same damage to the other side, because Rachel Auerbach wasn't Rachel Auerbach. She was a tragic person for sure, and we can talk about her years before the war, during the war, and after the war. Each one of them is a whole new story. She was part of a group of Holocaust survivors, which most of them were not really treated nicely by Yad Vashem officials of those times. The debate that was mentioned earlier in the discussion. So, but she's not the only one. What I'm saying.
No, but the question is, how do we remember this history when we discuss now witness pages? Do we mention her name or their name, or is it just the institution Yad Vashem?
We mentioned her before, for example, when we mentioned Silkis, which was
I didn't hear her name today. So anyway,
I think, but
important to acknowledge the contribution of how
I think that the point that you, and this is also, I need also to answer. I thought about the questions of Liora. Now, when I heard you about the differences in the questionnaires, I mean how the questions were asked in the interview of the witnesses, and this is of course a very different way that the accounts are taken today. I mean the way that they were taken at that time, and then it reminded me and going back to your question, that when the German prosecutors sent the question to Israel, they asked that not Yad Vashem will interview the people, but the police. And they didn't, so you asked about Rachel Auerbach. And then this is a very important point, because they said, we don't want them to speak about, all kind of things. We want them to answer very specific questions, and this is, of course, because we need it for the trial. We need it, so they sent specific questions, and then they took the eyewitness to the judge, and they asked him this and this and this, and don't tell us about your life and what happened to you, no, but just answer questions. And this is a completely different, of course, way than the way that we are taking and we are asking questions or questioning. We are preparing questionnaires today. If you see the questionnaires that were prepared in Yad Vashem, and you compare them to questionnaires that we are using today, I mean, it's a huge difference. They were looking, as you said, they were looking for specific names. No, you made a mistake. It's not there. It's what somewhere else. And this is also, in go to what Javi said, and what I found in my first study, that of course the people, historians in Yad Vashem, like Dinur and others, they didn't trust Rachel Auerbach at this point, because they said she's not a historian. And she won't, that's what they said, never mind. She won't know how to use documents or to ask, she's an author, she's a writer, she's writing, and this is not history.
And they say the same thing about Natan Eck.
Nahon, you're right. I wrote about it.
So last response, it's joining it the round table, which is wonderful, but people can't hear you because you're not speaking to the mic. So the last response, and we are going to last question, and then we'll call it the session.
Speaking about the historians and Auerbach and so on, I can tell you that the whole collection of the pages of testimony had nothing to do with the archives from the beginning. It was under commemoration. It's another department. It's the department that organized the Holocaust Remembrance Day, and things like that. It was commemoration. The historians in Yad Vashem, I started to work at Yad Vashem in June '84. It's 40 years. And it was something that we called it the Siberia of Yad Vashem. The archives would have nothing to do with pages of testimony. They are not reliable. It's hearsay. People write, there's no document. At the time there was a problem to accept oral history, okay, by the historians. And this whole collection developed on parallel with the archives. And thank God it did, because otherwise I don't know where it would be now. Okay? This is my personal remark. I lived it.
Next question? Last
you.
question, I guess.
No pressure, no pressure.
I have a question for Alexander. So you were saying about the use of AI and the entity recognition for just getting out the names of the transcripts of the testimonies. So can you tell me more about this work, and so how productive is that, and what are the problems that you face in using it?
Okay, I'll try to be short. Look, this is something that we started to work on something like a little bit more than 1 year ago. And there is this technology called the named entity recognition, that you have a document or a video testimony, you have to scan the document and then do OCR, or have the transcript of the, so you need a text, okay? And then there are IT instruments, technology that read the text and are able to pinpoint first names, last names, professions, dates, names of places, and so on, okay? So this is the entity recognition. This works rather well. Okay? And for instance, for cataloging purposes, if you need to know in a specific file that you have these names and these places and these dates and so on, that would be very instrumental for the researcher or for the lay people that need do the search. Okay? The problem for us is that we want to identify persons, okay? And this is the thing that we are spending more than 6 months or something like this on ping pong with the machine learning, that if you have on a page Jack and Jill, and then have Freeman and I don't know, Taylor, and London and Bristol. The machine has to recognize which is Jack Freeman from Bristol, and this is very difficult. Okay, the relations between the different entities, and you have to imagine that we are not speaking about one single page, but the testimony could be 30 pages, 80 pages, 150 pages. Okay. So one person could appear on page 3, 1593, and so on. So how do you reconstruct the relations between these different surnames, first names? This is something that the machine is still wrestling with. Okay. So there is as I said, a ping pong. The machine does a run. We get the results. We say oy vey. We say correct this and then you want to go to the machine another run, and so on and so on and so on until it's getting better, but it's still not reliable. Okay, my problem is that I'm very much afraid not to create a person that didn't exist. It happened. Okay, and somebody's mother was not Esther but Rivka, and I can create a person that was not there and match with some other that matches, and say, hell, this person did not die, survived, but it's a false positive. Okay, so there's an ethical problem here, and so I'm not so trustful. At this stage, I'm optimistic, but we still have to do a lot of work in order to be able to trust the accuracy of this thing. Okay, it's promising, but it's still not there. Thank you. No,
So, thank you so much for the fascinating presentations and the fascinating discussion. We're going to lunch?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh.
Okay, I have two things to say. First of all, the reason we are bugging you with the mics, it's for the recording. And since you are a group of people who understand the importance of preserving information and archiving it, I guess you can understand why we want you to collaborate with it. So I trust you to collaborate with it. Secondly, we're going to lunch, so you can all follow me. I mean, not